back in the most terrifying modern Factorio, and it's time for the next science pack. Not only that though, I'm gonna progress through the tech tree and with alarming complexity assemble the long-awaited locomotive. Hope you guys enjoy, and let's get on with it. When we left off last video, I had just finished creating and automating my first creatures, Vrox. Now, it is time to
slaughter them.
Why, you ask? Well, I think it's a good time as any to talk about the next science pack. What we'll be needing is glassware and basic substrate. The substrate is fairly easy and just needs cellulose, moss, and incubated petri dishes, all of which are trivial to attain. The glassware, however, needs these rubber stoppers. That's where the Vrox come in. When you slaughter Vrox, you get this stuff called formic acid, along with its organs and stuff. The formic acid is used along the chain to make latex, which is then finally turned into the stoppers. So, all in all, the creatures I spent so long getting last video are used solely to make me my bottle caps. I decided it was high time to get started on the basic substrate. I used my hell mod for the first time in this factory to find out how much I would need for 30 science per minute. It would take more wood than I currently produce to make the cellulose it requires, so I decided to copy my tree farms over. Naturally, I had to wait for my trees to be made in a nursery, so while that was happening, I got started on making the limestone I would need. I crafted 6 soil extractors and then started making the high-pressure furnaces I would need for the cellulose. Everything was going well until I saw how much seaweed I would need for the agar and the petri dishes. I would need 15 seaweed farms to keep up, and there was no way I was crafting all that, so I dropped the production to 15 science per minute. This also meant I didn't need as much cellulose, so I dismantled half of it. I then made the agar machines and finally placed the seaweed farms. To turn the regular old petri dishes into incubated petri dishes, I had to run them through a machine called a microorganism mine. I constructed them with a wacky belt design and it was done. Before I could make the moss I would need, I was interrupted by a power crisis, so I ran to my faraway coal patch and doubled my power production. I got back and finally made the moss machines and smacked all the ingredients together in an assembler to make the substrate. Oh, basic substrate! In order to slaughter my Vrox, I first needed to cage them. All I needed to do was make a few cages and then they would be recycled for each new Vrox. Luckily, they were cheap, so they were done in no time. We want to make this process as inhumane as possible. Give them no personal space. Why don't we all put them all in one cage, in fact? Just to add a cherry on top. An assembler would put them in their cage to be put in an expensive machine known as a slaughterhouse. Vrox go in, formic acid comes out. I just put all the other Vrox parts in chests because they're useless to me at the moment. I brought the acid over to where I'm going to be making the rubber stoppers and also brought over the molten glass I'll need for the glassware itself. Thus began the long process of making latex. It starts with this stuff called sodium alginate, which takes stone, limestone, and more seaweed. Very cheap overall. Then I needed some creamy latex, which takes more limestone and some sap. It was also done in no time. However, I was very constricted on space due to a huge lake, so I decided to set up a machine to make some extremely expensive landfill. While the landfill was being made, I mixed the creamy latex and the sodium alginate together with the formic acid from earlier to make latex slab. Then the slab goes into a high-pressure furnace with some steam to make latex at last. Finally, I just had to throw some raw coal in a destructive doohickey to make regular coal and make the rubber stoppers with that and the latex. Now I could make a glassworks and hook up my molten glass. I also forgot it would need a liquid fuel, so I brought up some acetylene too. Sooner or later, glassware was complete. Yes. I placed the research center down and brought the substrate and glassware over, and the first Pi Science Pack was born. First Pi Science Pack. Yes. Pi Science Pack 1. Electric mining drills, and what else did I want? I wanted quartz processing, and overwhelmed with the number of new opportunities, I decided to start small with quartz processing. This way, hopefully my base wouldn't starve of liquid fuel every time I needed some glass. However, before I could research anything, I had to bring the incredibly long belt down to my labs. Once I did, science was happening. Oh! As I waited for science to finish happening, I went over to my steam power plant to fix the ash buildup. Ash was being produced so quickly that the inserters couldn't physically export it fast enough. This meant I was only producing a fraction of my full energy potential. To remedy this, I plan to replace all of the ash exporting mechanical inserters with fancy new electric inserters. Not only that, but I would also route all the ash on belts to this unnecessarily complicated storage Johnson. I then went ahead and doubled my current setup and it seemed to be running just fine. Now I could get back to the task at hand and began with the research of burners, which would let me void my excess ash at great speeds. When that was complete, I queued all the researches I would need for my next big electricity milestone, geothermal power. With my ash storage at my current power plant quickly filling, I knew it was a temporary solution, so geothermal should fix that. While that was happening, I made a jaw crusher to finally process my quartz. It was a super simple recipe and only had a byproduct of stone. It made crushed quartz, which was almost double the efficiency of regular quartz when put in a glassworks. Coincidentally, it also produced the exact amount of stone I needed to run my moss farms for my tree farming, so I just routed the stone over there. A little while later, geothermal was finally finished researching, so I trekked over to a geothermal fissure a long ways away. I also brought a line of electric poles over. I then went back to the base and crafted the geothermal plant. Hey. I placed it down and realized I would need a heat exchanger to turn the geothermal water into steam. I'd also need pressurized water to actually mine the geothermal water. At last, I could put that steam into engines to make power. This gave me around 60 free megawatts with no cost, which was more than enough for my entire factory at this point. After solving my power problems for good this time, I began researching nickel and antimony processing. These were two of the three ingredients I was missing for intermetallics, the other being Nexit, which I'll get to later. I said I'd finished nickel last episode, but it turns out you first need to crush it into nickel grade 1. This was easy enough, and all I needed were a couple jaw crushers. Into furnaces they went, and out came nickel plates. Antimony is much more complicated. First, you actually need to get it out of the ground, which is a task in of itself. Instead of being normal, the special snowflake antimony drills only take fuel in canisters. The upside of this is that I can use any burnable fuel to mine it, so I decided to use aromatics since I wasn't consuming a huge amount of my supply. This was when I noticed that my overflowing amount of kerogen from my stone miners could be used in better ways than for a tiny bit of extra power. Instead, I could dip my toes into kerogen processing, where I can turn kerogen into shale oil in a retorter, and then into condensates, light oil, and heavy oil in a reformer. The condensates and heavy oil are useless to me, so they get voided, but the light oil can be turned into even more aromatics than I already have, making it an even more viable fuel source. After finishing kerogen processing, I went ahead and researched Nexit processing as well. Now it was time to bring the aromatics over and make a barreling machine to fill empty canisters. Antimony was being mined at last. I then began building the hideously long belt over to my factory and also went ahead and researched intermetallics. Now it was time to process the antimony. This is the most complicated processing process so far. First, the antimony ore runs through some automated screeners to make antimony grade 1 and grade 2, along with byproducts of stone and iron oxide. Then, the grade 1 goes into jaw crushers where they're turned into more grade 2. Then the grade 2 runs through more automated screeners to make grade 3 and grade 4, along with some gravel. Finally, the grade 3 then goes into a secondary crusher to make the rest of the grade 4. As for byproducts, I decided to throw my iron oxide and gravel into a chest and turn my stone into saline and then void it. Now I needed to turn my antimony grade 4 into antimony oxide. This can be done with plastic and oxygen in a basic oxygen furnace. To get the oxygen, I would have to electrolyze water into oxygen and hydrogen. Then, I needed a truckload of coal to fuel the furnaces, which consumed coal faster than this mod consumes my sanity. Oh wow, look at that. The harder part was routing the ash out of it, but I eventually got it working. Now I was producing a minuscule amount of antimony oxide. Woo! 1 every 5 seconds. Woo-wee! The next thing I did was bring the nickel up to the bus. This didn't take long. With everything else out of the way, it was now time for everyone's favorite fictional metal, Nexit. Nexit is strange in that it can't be mined by traditional means. Instead, in order to get it out of the ground, one must enslave the local wildlife. That's right, in order to mine the Nexit, I would need some volunteers, known as Digosauruses. The Digosauruses need food to make ore. They eat guts and meat, and luckily I had a decent supply from slaughtering frogs. However, I would rather die than send a belt of rock parts down to the Nexit ore patch, so I decided to invoke more volunteer work and made a creature called a caravan. This guy will take items from one caravan outpost to another, just like train stops. Boom. I needed to fire up the old Sample Maker 3000 for some moss gene samples, and I also needed some more generic Earth DNA samples, but he was done in no time. I put an outpost by the rocks and placed him down. I decided to name him Doug. I then went and put another outpost by the Nexit and told him what to do, and he got to work. Oh man, he's going. Oh, he don't care. He just goes around the buildings. Now we're here. Oh, and he did it! The Digosauruses are much more expensive than Doug here, and I can only make one with my current amount of moss samples. I went down to the Nexit and put him into a machine called a dig site, and he got to work as well. Yeah, look at him go! Start digging. Okay. That's two ore right there. It turns out you only get 1 ore per guts consumed, and only 2 per meat consumed. However, the Nexit ore to plate ratio is 3 to 1, meaning that it should be worth the cost. Before I could process the Nexit, I was interrupted by my steel machines producing absolutely nothing. It turns out my starter iron patch is completely gone now, so I had to bring a new belt of iron ore over from the new one. An entire belt of iron was likely overkill, but steel was plentiful. Now I could process the Nexit. It was very simple, and all I needed to do was run it through washers to make clean Nexit, and then throw it into furnaces. I brought the Nexit up to the bus, and now we had everything we needed for intermetallics. We're this close to intermetallics and trains. This close. You can't see me, but I'm doing a little symbol that says this close. Intermetallics are made in an advanced foundry with 2 main alloys. The first is iron Nexit antimony alloy, and the other is vitrolloy. The first one's components are in the name, and vitrolloy is made with titanium, copper, nickel, antimony oxide, and duralumin. They're both made in smelteries, meaning I would have to supply them with a ton of liquid fuel. I messed around with a few designs since there was a massive cliff in the way, but I ended up with this. Next, I connected the ingredients to the machines from the bus. Before I gave the smelters fuel, I set up an easier way to switch the liquid fuels out between my smelters and glassworks. Okay, I think it's ready. I wanted to wait for my Duralumin to back up on the belt before I used any more of my liquid fuel for intermetallics, but soon I started it up. Okay, okay. And boom. Woo, that's nice! Woo, that's nice! Now that intermetallics were out of the way, it was time to get started on the rest of the insane train recipe. As you can see, we need brakes, shafts, and a gearbox. All three of these are stupidly expensive and complicated. It would require almost everything I have on the bus, so I already know my base will be crying by the time I set this up. Even so, I began to bring all the transport belts up to where I'll be constructing the components. I also set up all the assemblers I'd be using. The gearboxes need fish oil of all things, so I set up another slaughterhouse to butcher fish that I had caught by hand. I also had to make an on-site ceramic machine, which I hand-fed with coke for now. After some time, I had finally built everything I needed and could start the assemblers. It's doing it. After getting as many components as I needed, I began researching trains. I just walked around as I waited for it to finish, and when it did, I placed the assembler. Locomotive, so we have 4 brakes, 4 shafts, 4 brakes, 1 gearbox, okay, 5 intermetallics, 30 circuits, and finally, 20 small parts. And 20 small parts. Oh! There it goes, so fast. So fast. And locomotive. Oh, man. I think that about sums it up. And that's where I'll end this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next one, where I hopefully transition to a rail base. Also, if you've played this mod, let me know in the comments if that's a bad idea, because I have no clue. Anyways, if you guys made it this far in the video, comment Pyanodon? More like Pie and a Dawn. Alright, bye.